What's up, friends? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Jess. Today we are finally going to go through all of the books that I read in April. Just to give y'all some quick numbers, I read 11 books in April, 4 3-star books, 5 4-star books, and 2 5-star books. However, I am going to be talking about 12 books today because I accidentally skipped over a book in my last recent reads video. So I'm going to go through the books from the lowest to the highest rating, and within each rating I also roughly ordered the books from least to most liked. This is a very rough order, so don't read too much into it. A 3 stars is still a 3 stars. And in case you're new to my channel, I don't do half-star ratings. I probably should start at some point, but I don't know. I'm just not a half-star, quarter-star rating kind of gal. But anyway, let's just get into it, starting with the book that I forgot to mention in my recent reads, which was The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. I gave this book 3 stars. So I actually read this in February. It was a part of my top 22 books that I want to read in 2022. And I think it's the first one that I read off the list, and it just disappointed me. It wasn't bad or anything, but it was kind of a letdown, and honestly, I feel like the fact that I forgot to mention it in my recent reads video should clue you into the fact that I also found it just a little bit forgettable. It didn't stick with me. The Beautiful Ones takes place in an alternate 19th century London. In this world, telekinesis is a publicly known ability that some people have, but it's a very low class thing to do. Our main character, Nina, is debuting into high society where her reputation is already tarnished by her own haphazard telekinesis. And then Hector comes into town. He's a famous telekinetic performer, and he not only helps her with her powers, but also makes her fall in love too. The next thing that I'm going to say isn't actually in the synopsis, but I knew about it before going into the story, and I think it's important for you to know about it in order to understand why exactly I feel the way about this book that I do. You might want to skip ahead to whatever timestamp I put here if you don't want to know anything else at all, but I don't think it's a major spoiler or anything. It's said pretty early on in the book. But anyway, a lot of the conflict in this story comes from the fact that Hector and Nina's cousin-in-law have a past together. And this background meant that I couldn't get behind the main couple. This isn't just Hector used to be in love with her cousin and he's not anymore and he's just trying to hide that he ever was. No, he actively still is, and he decides to use Nina in order to get closer to the cousin. None of that tells me that he respects women, and none of that tells me that he should be with Nina. I will say there were a few scenes that almost made me fall for it, but at the end of the day, Nina deserved better. And a romance book just isn't fun if you don't care about the main couple. I didn't care one way or another if they got together. The only thing I cared about was the satisfaction of seeing people get their just desserts, and we didn't even see that. The ending was so dissatisfying to me. Credit where credit is due. Moreno-Garcia did create a telenovela level of drama, and they certainly created a telenovela level of heated. And by heated, I mean I don't give a shit about the relationship really, but I did want them to get together purely out of spite. I rooted for them because I did not root for the antagonist, so that's it. Spite was what was keeping me going. But the thing is that Moreno-Garcia built up all of this anger and irritation towards certain people, and there was no satisfying release to it. I've used this metaphor before when talking about other books, but it's like the difference between popping a balloon and deflating a balloon. It just felt like a stunted experience. As I said though, it did deliver on the telenovela vibes, so if you want that sort of vibe, give the book a try. Maybe you'll care for it more. I did see on Twitter though that Moreno-Garcia expressed some distaste about people calling it a telenovela, her argument being that people see a drama book written by a Latinx author and they just call it a telenovela. But speaking as someone who has watched telenovelas and was raised with them, that's just what it is. It's dramatic, but it's dramatic in an almost over-the-top convoluted sort of way. It could be a very fun book for you. Had the ending delivered what I wanted it to deliver, I think I would have given it more stars, regardless of whether or not I supported the couple, because it was very fun to hate the antagonists. They were made to be hated, and I buddy read this book with Rita from Life Worth Reading, so shitting on that antagonist with her was amazing. Moving on from that, so I read a lot of poetry this month for a vlog for National Poetry Month, so I'm not going to go super in depth on my feelings about all of these poetry collections that I read. You can just watch the vlog for that. The first one that I'm going to mention is The Princess Saves Herself in This One by Amanda Lovelace, also 3 stars. Please just assume that all of the books that I mentioned are 3 stars until I mention the first 4-star one, okay? Anyway, this is a modern poetry collection that tells the story of Lovelace's life in 4 parts. We have the princess, the damsel, the queen, and then you. And I feel bad saying this because this is a very personal collection and it talks about painful things in her life. And I have a lot of respect for that. I have a lot of respect for people who put their vulnerabilities out there. But this felt like what people are making fun of when they make fun of modern poetry. To me, it felt like it lacked cohesion and intention. It did feel like there was just random spacing and line breaks just for the sake of making it look like it's a poem instead of there being intention and purpose behind the way the poem is structured. So it wasn't horrible by any means, but it wasn't my thing. Next up is The Stranger by Albert Camus. I read this as a part of the Linguathon Readathon, which is a readathon focused on translated fiction. There is also a vlog for that, so also not going to go super in depth on my feelings about this book. The Stranger is a French classic. It's a very short book. It focuses on an Algerian man who gets pulled into an honestly absurd murder. This book reminded me of a combination of 3 different books that I've read before. One is The Catcher in the Rye, because of the admittedly somewhat grating tone and the complete disregard for how women are treated and how men talk about women. In case you didn't know, The Catcher in the Rye is one of my most hated books ever. However, this is only like a tinge Catcher in the Rye, maybe like 20% Catcher in the Rye, so I was willing to get past that. The second book is Crime and Punishment, because this is also an exploration of a person's psyche after committing a crime and having to face the consequences of it. And the third book is A Sprinkle of Convenience Store Woman, which I'm going to be talking about later on in this video. But I compare it to that one because there are some themes of how society treats people harshly if they don't react the way that society deems that they should react. Basically, my feelings on this book are that I wouldn't spend more than $2 on it, but if I happen to come across it in a thrift store for super cheap, I would be willing to have a physical copy of it on my shelves. Next is Nepantla, an anthology dedicated to queer poets of color. It is exactly what it says on the tin. This is another poetry collection that I read for the National Poetry Month vlog. If all goes to plan, that vlog should be coming out a week after this video comes out, so you're just gonna have to wait a little bit to get my full thoughts on that. But this poetry collection features poets like Ocean Vuong, Audre Lorde, and James Baldwin. The styles and themes of the poems in this collection are so varied that I think it was just inevitable that I was gonna get 3 stars. And to be clear, 3 stars isn't a bad rating. It's average, you know. If something gets 3 stars, I don't think I wasted my time reading it or anything, but I also didn't particularly enjoy it. That sounds worse than it is. Just know that 3 stars is not a bad rating, okay? It's just maybe not meant for me while still being good. Anyway, that long-winded explanation aside, I don't think any of the poems in this collection were 5 stars to me, but there were some that I thought were 4 stars. There were some that I enjoyed more than others. Regardless of whether or not I enjoyed certain poems or another, I do think that this is a poetry collection that's worth reading for the different perspectives that it provides. Even if this isn't something that you can enjoy as a poetry collection, I think there's a lot to get out of it from its different point of views and the different themes and things that it's discussing. Next, the only physical book that I read this entire month. Most of the books that I read are ebooks that I get from my library, so that you know, or I buy them or something like that. But this is the only physical one. It's Dune by Frank Herbert. In case you haven't heard of Dune, this is a sci-fi classic that takes place on a desert planet named Arrakis, which is home to a life-changing drug. Our main character, Paul, is a part of a noble family that's been betrayed and who is also possibly the center of a centuries-old legend. There is a lot that can be said about this book, and I talk about all of it in the vlog. In terms of entertainment, this is an easier book to get through than I thought it would be. I was very intimidated by it at first, but it is easy to get through. However, the pacing is off, and it did really start to feel like a drag by the time I got to, like, I don't know, book 3 or something like that. There's a lot of introspection with the characters, which I thought was super interesting, as well as the discussions of ecology and, you know, the origins of religion, which is another major theme. That being said, if you want to read this, I think it's very important to read some articles online about Dune's relationship with white savior trope and the fact that it bases a lot of its world and culture on indigenous populations. The only other thing that I will say is that I am unwilling to continue this series. It feels like a lot of effort. Moving on to our 4-star books, we've got The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang. Helen Hoang is also the author of The Kiss Quotient and The Bride Test, which are companion books following different couples within the same universe. The Heart Principle follows Quan, who was a side character in the other books. He's recently gone through a life-changing event. Our love interest, Anna, is a burned-out violinist who's struggling to play music. The book opens with Anna's long-term boyfriend saying that he wants to open up their relationship before fully committing, like an asshole. And so Anna decides to stick it to him and have a one-night stand. enter Quan. This book was the book that I was begging for, because when I read The Kiss Quotient and I read The Bride Test, Quan was like my favorite side character out of all of them. I was in love with this man. He seemed so cool, so funny. I thought he was gonna be like a hot bad boy in his own book, and I was kind of disappointed with The Heart Principle. It's not a bad book by any means. It's a very good book. It's just not what I was expecting from it. Quan in this book does not at all feel like the Quan of the other books, and that makes total sense. Like, he really did go through a life-changing event. He went through some trauma, but I feel like a lot of people wanted a book focused on him in order to get more of the Quan that we all fell in love with, and he just wasn't the same person. This isn't the Quan that I fell in love with. He's a more reserved character in this book. He's still healing from what happened to him, and this goes for more than just Quan's character. It goes for the entire book as a whole. It's a more painful and emotional story than the other companion books are. I finished this book like in the first couple days of April, so I'm filming this like a month and a half later, but if my memory serves me correctly, some triggers that you should keep in mind are depression, suicidal ideation, caregiver burnout, and terminal illness. As is common in Helen Hoang's books, there's also representation for autism and OCD as well. Now I can't remember if it's officially diagnosed or not, but I'm fairly certain that this counts as OCD representation. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But both of those things are things that Anna is working through and going to therapy for. There is a lot more focus on these issues and those plot lines involving these trigger warnings. There's less of a romance focus. Personally, I think it's a good book. I thought it was really well written. I did enjoy it, but I think you need to know what you're getting into. Otherwise, you're going to be disappointed, because if you expect what you got from the other books, it's just not the same. But the romance we did get was cute. There was a lot of character development, mostly on the part of Anna, I will admit. And I always love the representation that Hoang has in her books. The caregiver representation is a new thing for her, which I thought was very interesting, so important to talk about, but keep in mind that it was painful to read, so just make sure you're in a good headspace for this one. Next, we've got another poetry collection. We've got Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. This is another modern poetry collection, also split into 4 parts. We've got the hurting, the loving, the breaking, and the healing. I did like this more than The Princess Saves Herself in this one, though. I felt like the poems in this collection had more of a cohesive flow to them, and they felt more relatable and raw to me. Kaur also utilized a lot of parallelism and repetition, which are 2 style choices that I really enjoy in literature. Next up is Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wein. I read this during my birthday vlog video. I talk about this book quite extensively in that vlog, as well as detailing the origin story of my channel name, which did begin with this book. This is a World War II book centered around 2 young women who work for the British military. One is a spy and the other is a pilot named Marty. The story is told in the form of a confession written by the spy, whose codename is, of course, Verity. On a mission to Nazi-occupied France, their plane crashes. Verity is captured by the Gestapo, but the fate of Marty is unknown to us. There are 2 primary themes to this book. One is a very, very clear message about youth in wartime. Both Marty and Verity, as well as some other characters that I mentioned in the book, are very young, maybe mid-20s, if not younger than that. And the writing style does reflect that. It has a very immature tone to it sometimes that may seem out of place and jarring in a book about war, but I think that's the point. The dichotomy between being young and being in war is very jarring. It's meant to be jarring. A lot of these characters are playing pivotal roles in the war, and they're going through things and doing things that no one that young should have to go through. Speaking of, there are trigger warnings for torture, mentions of rape, and death, so keep that in mind. The second theme is friendship. You do get to learn the story of how Marty and Verity met and how they became friends. It's the type of friendship where you're just in love. It's your platonic other half, your soulmate. I think that's how I would describe the friendship between Marty and Verity. And I think it's mostly for that friendship that I love this book. It's not perfect, but it's emotional and it's bittersweet and it's loving. And the twist, the way that it ends and what the truth actually is, it surprised me the first time that I read this book, and it had been so long since I first read it that I had already forgotten everything, and it shocked me all over again. Up next is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. I also read this for the poetry vlog, but it is not actually poetry. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a collection of letters that Rilke wrote to a young poet who reached out to him because he admired Rilke's work. Rilke is a poet, however, so I think it goes without saying that the letters themselves are very poetic. This collection, I think, was just something that I needed to read at the time that I read it. It's like a more poetic, slightly more dramatic, and depressed self-help book that talks about things like learning to be okay with being alone and the difficulties of growing. I definitely want to have a copy of this. And the last poetry collection that I read for that vlog was The Iraqi Nights by Dunya Mikhail. This one actually shows up in 2 vlogs though, because it shows up in the poetry vlog, but it also shows up in the Linguathon vlog because it was the group book for the readathon. This collection is written by a former Iraqi journalist, and it's written in a style somewhat like 1001 Nights. There are truly some beautiful poems in here. It has a big range of emotions because of Mikhail's background. She talks a lot about war and pain and death, but she also talks about love and things like the birth of her child. I read so much poetry this month, I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember the specifics of what style details belong to which collection. I just know that this style of poetry to me felt like a mixture between modern and classic. There's certainly more appealing phrases for modern audiences. I think it's easier to read this than like read Poe's poetry, but there was a slight classic vibe to it. I think Mikhail has a lot of respect for the traditional structure of poetry. And then of course the ideas of the poetry collection, they are modern ideas because they are happening today and they happened throughout her life, but they're classic ideas because things like war have been around forever. Who asked for your opinion? On to the 5 stars, we have 1,000 Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. This book takes place in Afghanistan over the course of 30 years. We see the Soviet invasion, the rise of the Taliban, and other historical events from the point of view of 2 women, Maryam and Layla. Like every Hosseini book, this story is emotional and raw and painfully human. The 2 women go through a lot of hardships in their life and end up finding each other while just trying to survive. Ultimately, this is a story about making a family, in my opinion anyway. There's a lot of character growth, there's a lot of relationship growth, mostly with the main characters. The side characters are much less nuanced. And there are several trigger warnings, but the 2 main ones that I can think of are domestic abuse and miscarriages. I really don't know what else to say about this book because it takes place over such a long period of time as you're just following through these women's lives. But what I can say is that there has never been a Khaled Hosseini book that I don't recommend. It's an emotional time. You have to experience his books for yourself. And then the final book is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is another book that I read for Linguathon, so if you want more thoughts on that, make sure to check out the vlog. As I'm sure you can guess from the title, this book follows a convenience store worker named Keiko. Keiko is in her 30s and truly content with her life. She's happy to be working at the convenience store. As she describes it, she really likes working in the store because the rules and expectations there make sense, even if the rules and expectations of real life don't make sense to her. Recently, however, the constant nagging has become overwhelming for Keiko as she's told again and again that she should settle down with a husband, she's to start a more traditional, ambitious career. Now, this isn't explicitly said so correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding, Keiko is heavily coded to be autistic. Just to give you some more context on what I mean when I say the rules and expectations of real life don't make sense to her. Convenience Store Woman is a very, very short book. It's also a very weird book, especially the ending, but it's a fascinating perspective. I really think this book will get people to confront some internal biases regarding how they judge people who act differently and want to lead different lives than they do. I know it was getting me to confront some internal biases that I really hadn't thought about before. This talks a lot about how society seeks to change, and if not change, then to punish and get rid of people who are different. Again, the ending is kind of odd. I think it might offend some people, but I don't think it was meant to be offensive. If you want more details on that, check out my Linguathon vlog, but ultimately, this is a short book. It's a super quick read, and it's totally worth giving a try in my opinion. It's just different from other books. Whether you like it or not, it stands out as an experience, and I think that's worth giving a try. All right, and that is it for my April wrap up. And just to give you a little bit of a spoiler for May, because I'm about halfway through May now, I think May is going to turn out to be a really good reading month, so I'm looking forward to the next wrap up. But I hope you enjoyed this one. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I've mentioned, or if you haven't read any of them. Are you interested in reading any of them? As always, I appreciate any and all support that you give me. I will see you in the next one.